Anyway, with that, we turned. You remember there was an old show years ago called On the Road with Charles Carroll.
Yes.
Which Mark had to remind me of the last name because I couldn't think of it here a moment ago. But we do our own version with On the Road with Dennis Owens because we never know where Dennis is going to be when we talk to him from ABC 27 News. He's on the road. He's at the counter. He's cooking eggs on the stove. Where are you at this morning, my friend?
On my way to get my son. We're going to take him to school this morning, going from the gym to taking my son to school.
From the gym?
We have a 6 a.m. basketball game at the West Shore YMCA. You're welcome to come up and join us.
6 p.m.
Tuesdays and Thursdays.
I got this crazy little thing I'm doing tonight called the Mid-Penn Championships on ABC 27.4.
Well, yeah, it's a 6 a.m. game. 6 a.m. I just played.
Well, that's what time I'm doing the Middletown Altoona girls game. And then right after I'm doing Trinity and Cumberland Valley for the championship of the boys. So, yeah, I mean, I would. You know what? I seriously, when you tell me your next game is, I will be there. I will be there.
I'm telling you, it's 6 a.m., 6 in the morning at the West Shore Y.
What?
I'm coming from, I just played. I'm coming from it right now to get my son and go to school.
Oh, so you played in the game. I'm sorry, I misunderstood that. You played in the game.
Yeah.
Are you out of your mind? What's going on? You're supposed to be getting older here, Frankie. What's going on?
Well, if you saw my game, you would see that I am getting older. To use the word play, let's just say I show up, okay? I show up.
Okay. But your heart is willing, the body may be a little slower and following along. So
That is exactly right. That is exactly right. We'll get a little sweat going.
All right. I like to just sometimes throw at you and say, what are you seeing right now? You're in the news business. Do you find yourself getting breathless anymore as you cover, the state and you look at the national and you see everything that's happening right now and you try to figure out what the heck the narrative is of what's going on? What would the narrative be right now from Dennis Owens' point of view on what's happening with the news every day, particularly in a political way?
Well, first of all, it's like a fire hose. The Trump administration, we're only 3 weeks in, and it feels like, a couple of years. And I'm not saying that pejoratively. There's just so much stuff flying out of Washington. There's lawsuits being filed. There's executive orders being issued. Lots of changes being attempted. And you just breathless is a good term, or trying to get your arms around it. And there's so many things happening. As a media member, I feel like it's impossible to keep up with. And then you wonder, what's the jingling of the keys over here? But then, they're jingling the keys over here, making a big deal out of something. What's happening behind the scenes that we're not aware of? So I'm just trying to see where the dust settles. As for the state capitol, if you bet that not a lot will happen, typically you're right. There's usually inertia, but the governor has put out his $51.4 billion budget. We talked about that. That's his wish list. Budget hearings begin at the state capitol in earnest next week. That's the House and Senate Appropriations Committees call the various agencies in, and they ask them about what their ask is, and then it gives lawmakers a chance to directly question the various heads of various agencies. There's usually a couple of good stories that come out of that, unrelated to how much money they're asking for. They get to probe in, the lawmakers get to probe in on various policy decisions being made, and they get to publicly question people that they otherwise don't get a chance to. So that's what's happening at the state capitol.
When you look at this whole Doge attitude, and that seems to be the dominant thing every day right now, and we saw Musk coming out with his son X the other day. Most people, you had your son's name was X, you'd say it's pretty weird, but when your name's Elon, X isn't that bad. So it was interesting to hear him come out the other day and talk about what he's doing. It was kind of fascinating as you're sitting there watching him. And it was also fascinating seeing President Trump share the stage with somebody. It seemed a little awkward at times, but what was your take on all that?
Well, so a couple of things. As an American and as a guy who has seen government up close, there's plenty of waste and ridiculousness that's being funded at both the state level and the federal level. So anybody that says we want to get our arms around that, I'm all for that in theory. I think Congress, and actually Congressman Scott Perry, which is your congressman, it's one of his big things that we don't every year, that somebody doesn't every year, go back and look at what we're spending money on and saying, is it appropriate? Is it not appropriate? And in a budget like we have and $30-some trillion in debt as we are, you can't tell me there aren't things we could be cutting and should be looking at it every year. For some reason, the negligent people in Washington, whether it's Congress or whoever you want to lay blame on, and I'm not being pejorative, it's all parties, both parties. The bottom line is nobody is really doing a good enough job paying attention to where the money's going. So in theory, I like the idea that some outsider's going to come in. Now, the problem is with Elon Musk, there are legitimate questions as to whether he's the appropriate guy. Remember, he has a ton of government contracts as well. His businesses are largely dependent on government money. And is that the fox you want in the henhouse? I'm not saying, again, I'm not being pejorative. I'm just saying these are legitimate questions we can ask. But in theory, I like the idea of trying to wring a little efficiency out of the overall government, because if you just look at the numbers, efficiency hasn't been wrung out of the government in a long time.
You know, I come back and there's two things that come to mind as I was listening to you there, Dennis. And number one is you basically were describing the idea of zero-based budgeting, going back each year and saying we've got to justify what we're doing. And we haven't done that in a long time anywhere in government. And people say, if you go in and say, let's do zero-based budgeting, they'd laugh at you. But it's a realistic way of looking at it. And I think a lot of people are bolting right now, or revolting, if you will, against the idea of that happening, which is kind of what Trump is suggesting. I think moving in that direction. Again, you can disagree on the way he's doing it, but the other part of that whole deal too is, we want to have questions asked like that. I don't trust anybody when it comes to the whole government thing. So this idea of, well, my side's doing it, therefore everything's okay, I don't buy that either. The idea of, well, Trump's in, everything's okay, I'll go along like a lemming and go over the cliff. No, I think a healthy distrust of government is good. I don't even mind the judges in a lot of these cases coming along and saying, let's slow down a little bit, let's take a look at what you're doing. Those are the things that we need to do in a government. We didn't want to make a government of enabling it to do things. Rather, we wanted to limit it in doing things. And I think the limitations are still important no matter who's in power or what party's in power. Your thoughts?
Well, I absolutely agree with you. And the bottom line is we are tremendously in debt. We have a structural deficit as well, meaning we are spending more than we're taking in on a year-to-year basis. And you can't start to rein it in without hurting somebody. And that's the other thing as a media member. Do you get breathless on every single one of these things and act as, and this is what Democrats are doing, act as if the sky is falling on every single one? And then that leads to fatigue, and people are like, well, you're just resisting for wanting to resist. Or do you pick your spots and say, okay, yeah, there can be cuts there, but we really shouldn't cut here. And that's what we need, that discerning. But as far as zero-based budgeting is concerned, I remember a young state lawmaker who won a county commissioner seat and went into the county commission and found out that they were big in debt, and he decided to do zero-based budgeting, found millions of dollars of savings, and balanced that budget. And that young state lawmaker that became Montgomery County Commissioner is now Josh Shapiro, the governor of the state of Pennsylvania, which there's not even a whisper doing zero-based budgeting, which actually, as I'm thinking about it, that's the question I need to ask him next time. Why not?
I asked him that in our show. He said he's in favor of that kind of thing, but I think what he's also looking at when he get in there from the county commissioner in Montgomery County, now coming up here to Pennsylvania, no one does it. No one even thinks about it. No one even talks about it. And so, I wanted to ask you one final question here, Dennis, before we get out of here today. And you're on your next basketball game or whatever. But I always come back to that. Is our I hear this thing. Is our nation in a constitutional crisis and with the Trump administration in control, or have we been in a constitutional crisis in terms of how we've operated government up till now? There's two questions there. I just wonder what your thoughts might be on that.
Well, my answer, are we in a constitutional crisis? And that is the buzzword in D.C. these days. And my answer is going to be an unsatisfying maybe. Because, look, here's my fear. First of all, executive orders on steroids have been a problem both parties for a number of years now.
Agreed.
Okay. Congress is a co-equal branch of government, but with the recent red wave, I don't know that there's anybody in Congress that really even has the stomach or the appetite to challenge Donald Trump, or to even if he goes way off the rails on what he's doing. So I'm wondering where that safeguard is. To me, that's something we need to keep an eye on. And is that a constitutional crisis? And I believe you have your Vice President of the United States writing recently that the president doesn't have to listen to what the Supreme Court says.
Oh, they do.
What? Well, yes, they do. But that's a real concern as well. So again, look, elections have consequences. Donald Trump was elected. Republicans were elected across both chambers of Congress. That's what happens. Our constitutional democracy's lasted for a couple hundred years. It has faced crises in the past. Is this one? again, an unsatisfying maybe. I'm still trying to figure out what the heck's going on, and I will remind everybody, I think we're less than a month into this presidency.
Well, the interesting thing to me is I think he's definitely pushing the outer envelope edges of where his power is. But I think that how always has happened over years in our constitutional government, where maybe the Congress has pushed that. We've seen different things with the Congress that was there right after the Civil War was over, pushing the limits of how far they could go with trying to impeach Andrew Johnson, for example, different things like that. So I think we see it ebb and flow a lot of times, but he certainly has made his presence known in a way that I think we are at an interesting moment in history right now. Are we going to change the fundamental way we do government? Can you add private sector principles to the way government's going to operate? And will this be a turnaround point? He's only got 2 years to get that done. He's walking on a high rope right now, a tight rope with no net underneath, I think. Final thoughts, Dennis.
Well, you said it's an interesting point in history, and you couldn't be more right. And you just mentioned, are we impeaching Andrew Johnson or aren't we? We've impeached Donald Trump twice, and he got reelected.
Yeah.
These are clearly uncharted waters. And the other thing that's interesting to me, he's term limited. The clock is ticking, and that might be why he has his hair on fire on what all he's doing, because he knows he's only got so much time to get stuff done before the political winds shift. And all of a sudden, Congress people that need to get reelected, the support he enjoys in Congress has a shelf life because they need to get reelected. If he goes beyond the pale and too far to where Republicans who are now supporting him and propping him up fear that they could lose their own elections, well, that's going to be a different dynamic as well. So, again, the answer is maybe. Keep your eyes wide. The chance won't come again, as a Bob Dylan song says. These are interesting times that we're living in.
No question about it, my friend. To be continued. Have a wonderful day, and appreciate you taking the time this morning to be with us, as always, Dennis. Talk to you next week.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, buddy. Dennis Owens this morning, ABC 27 News, running somewhere else, Mark, as he always is. We're going to take a break. We'll come back. Mark's got some more news under the radar for you, all straight ahead. You can comment on what Dennis had to talk about with me this morning at 833-478-4729. That's our text line, and we will get back to you right away with some kind of answer. Don't forget, at the end of the show today, we've got our WOYK YouTube podcast that we have up on all of our various segments throughout the morning. I'm Gary Sutton. This is WOYK. Back after this at 7:49.